Hello dear friends, welcome back at Lit E-City, the YouTube channel that brings you new and exciting videos related with English literature, those that are made keeping in mind NTA, NET English and other related exams. Dear friends, in this video, I have brought to you some very important texts related with post-colonial theory. In this part first, I have tried to work on those texts that helped post-colonial theory to establish as a major field of inquiry in English literature. So friends, basically the very first work which we will discuss is Black Orpheus, which was written by Jean-Paul Sartre, and this was basically written as a preface to the famous famous anthology Leopold Senghor's An Anthology of the New Negro and Malagasy Poetry in French that gave negritude an international exposure. There are some facts which you should remember, especially for your exam, that this is written as a preface. This essay was written as a preface by Sartre, who was the famous existentialist philosopher, Western philosopher. Though himself being a white, he promoted this negritude, this black writing. Sartre described negritude as an anti-racist racism which is deployed for the sake of the abolition of all racial differences. He treated the intellectual movement as a refusal of Western cultural domination and the supremacy of European epistemologies. So basically this preface in nutshell tries to point out why Negro movement, why negritude, why black consciousness, all these are important part, and Black Orpheus is his metaphor for presenting the black sensitivity in poetry. A very related work and just published 2 years later is Discourse on Colonialism. It was originally also written in French by M. Césaire, who was a Martinican poet, and he was one of the founders of negritude movement along with Senghor. This essay is considered as a foundational text of post-colonial literature. It is because of this earlier anthology and this particular essay by Césaire that post-colonial literature came to the main front of literary theory during the 50s and 60s. Césaire questions the European agenda to civilize the colonized people, the traditional, or we can say the orthodox argument given by the Westerners that they colonize only to civilize, because the colonizers seem to enact the most barbaric violence on their subject, on the colonized people. Then how can we say, how can the colonized people believe that their project is to civilize? He blames the modern bourgeois thinker for using language and scholarly prestige to mask European colonialist violence. According to M. Césaire, all these thinkers, they are inspired by the capitalist aim to gain as much as possible, and by using a particular language, they try to hide, they try to mask the colonialist violence in the garb of civilization. The next text, relatively written a bit later, Black Skin, White Masks. It was first published in 1952. Here we should note the writer Frantz Fanon, one of the earliest writers to write about Black Atlantic theory. When he was quite young, only 27 years old, Black Skin, White Masks is written in the form of an autobiographical text, and it seeks to understand the foundations of anti-black racism with the help of psychoanalytic query. Dear friends, when it was first published, it created an uproar because of its very scholarly presentation of the ideas. Fanon tries to examine how the impacts of colonization can be observable in language and interracial relationship, where he says that black people, they have black skin, but they want to emulate, they want to imitate their they supposedly white masters, and this imitation, he used the metaphor of white mask. They use this white mask to appear to be like their masters, to appear to be presentable just like the white or supreme leaders. A very foundational text, the landmark text, The Wretched of the Earth, written and published in 1961, which established Fanon as the leading intellectual in the international decolonization movement. Once again, the preface of the book was written by Jean-Paul Sartre. You can understand how Sartre contributed very much to the post-colonial mission. Now, in this book is very controversial right from its first publication, because Fanon saw violence as the defining characteristic of colonialism, and if violence may also be cathartic reaction to the operation of colonialism and a necessary tool of political engagement. So many Western thinkers find that Fanon is actually promoting violence as a legit mean, as a valid mean to counter the Western colonial project. And actually there were some charges against Frantz Fanon that how he promoted this violence and created instability among many African nations by his provocative writing. There is a very famous essay in this particular book, and the name of the essay is On National Culture. In this, Fanon proposes his model for the development of a national culture among the colonized nations of Africa. He says that such nations should avoid the orientalized version of the pre-colonial history. What Westerners has told them that or wrote that it is their history, they should try to neglect it. Rather, they should build their own national culture on the material resistance of people against colonial domination. They should take into consideration the local rebellions or the local folk literature, and on the basis of these local heroes, they try to create their own national culture. Another very important text by Southern Asian writer, hitherto we have read about African post-colonial discourse. The Location of Culture, first published in 1963, is a landmark collection of essays by Homi K. Bhabha, who is an outstanding scholar and thinker associated with post-colonial discourse. Bhabha is perhaps most well known for his theory of cultural hybridity, which he develops in the famous essay Signs Taken for Wonders, which is an essay in this collection. Bhabha argues hybridity results from various forms of colonization which lead to cultural collisions and interchanges. These collisions are between the colonizer and the colonized, and it creates a hybrid culture. Now, some of the essays, list of essays in this collection, these are also important because they may be asked to individually in the exam. The Commitment to Theory, Interrogating Identity, Frantz Fanon and the Post-Colonial Prerogative, The Other Question, Stereotype, Discrimination and the Discourse of Colonialism, Of Mimicry and Man, The Ambivalence of Colonial Discourse, Sly Civility, Sign Taken from Wonders, Questions of Ambivalence and Authority Under a Tree Outside Delhi, May 1817, Articulating the Archy, Cultural Difference and Colonial Nonsense, Dissemination, Time, Narrative and the Margins of Modern Nation, The Post-Colonial and the Postmodern, The Question of Agency, By Bread Alone, Signs of Violence in the Mid-19th Century, How Newness Enters the World, Postmodern Space, Post-Colonial Times and the Trials of Cultural Translation, Conclusion, Race, Time and the Revision of Modernity. These are the list of the essays that basically are the complete content of this particular highly intellectual book, and inspired a lot of rejoinders. we come to one of the foundational texts of post-colonialism, that is Orientalism, first published in 1978 by the Palestinian academic Edward Said, that established post-colonial studies as an academic phenomenon. Sayyid examines the vast tradition of Western constructions of the Orient. Orient is not something natural, it is a Western construct. It is actually a production of Western discourse, a means of self-definition of Western culture, and most important, a justification of imperial domination of Oriental peoples. Using a vast range of examples, Aeschylus' play The Persians through Macaulay and Marx, Cambridge History of Islam, taking all these texts into consideration, Sayyid attempts to examine the stereotypes and distortions through which the East have been consumed and represented. So according to Sayyid, Orientalism is this European construction of the East as primitive, savage, pagan, undeveloped and criminal. These are the stereotypes with which the West has presented the East. Such a construction enabled the European to justify his presence. The poor, weak, native needed to be governed and developed or civilized, as if it was the burden, the task of the European to do so. History of the Voice, first published in 1985, is the complete title, The Development of Nation Language in Anglophone Caribbean Poetry. It is a major work of post-colonial theory by Barbadian academic Edward Kamau Braithwaite, and he proposed in this particular book his model of nation language. According to Braithwaite, nation language is the new language formed by the slaves and laborers who were brought to the Caribbean by the colonizers. Nation language uses the words of imperial language, for example English, or it may be French or Spanish, but has very different speech patterns. Race, Writing and Difference, published in 1986. It is a classic of cultural post-colonial criticism written by Henry Louis Gates, who edited this collection of essays and provide a broad introduction to the idea of race as a meaningful category in the study of literature and shaping of literary theory. The fundamental premise of the book is that race was not fixed or naturalized, but rather a socially and historically constructed and institutionalized phenomena. Once again, like Oriental, this is a category which is not natural, but rather Western discourse created category. Decolonizing the Mind, published in 1986. The complete title, Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of Language in African Literature, written by Kenyan novelist and post-colonial theorist Ngugi wa Thiong'o. It is a remarkable collection of essays about language, its constructive role in national culture, history and identity. Ngugi considers English in Africa like a cultural bomb that has continued a process of wiping out pre-colonial histories and identities. That is why Thiong'o, first he wrote in English, then he basically returned to his native language Gikuku and wrote many works in his native language and inspired other writers also to write in their native language. The Signifying Monkey. It is first published in 1988, once again written by Henry Louis Gates. It is once again a groundbreaking work on black literary theory. It traces the folkloric origins of the African American cultural practice of signifying and analyzes the interplay between text of prominent African American writers Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison, Zora Neale Hurston and Ismail Reed. He presents basically these things. Signifying monkey is a metaphor used for the black writer and the narrator who tries to present themselves something else that is basically considered different from the signified the Western metaphysics present them to be. The Empire Writes Back. It is once again a classic collection of essays written on the post-colonial matters. It is edited by three distinguished Australian scholars, Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffin. It was the first major theoretical account of a wide range of post-colonial texts and their relation to the larger issues of post-colonial nature. Its section, Cutting the Ground, Critical Models of Post-Colonial Literature, and again the essay, National and Regional Models, they are now considered to be the essential readings for understanding the basic of post-colonial theory. Now the title, The Empire Writes Back, refers to Salman Rushdie's 1982 article, The Empire Writes Back with a Vengeance, which indicates the ways post-colonial voices respond to the Western literary canon of colonial center. In theory, Nations, Classes, Literature, first published in 1992, is a powerful and incisive critique of the Western idea of national allegories, which was promoted by the Western Marxist critic Frederick Jameson. And in this book, Ajaz Ahmad, the famous South Asian critic hailing from Pakistan, tries to dismantle many of the commonplaces that dominate contemporary cultural criticism. The book also contains analysis of the concept of Indian literature, genealogy of the term Third World, and of the conditions under which so-called colonial discourse theory emerged in metropolitan intellectual circles. Writing Diaspora, Tactics of Intervention in Contemporary Cultural Studies, an important work by cultural critic Ray Chow, in which she raises questions regarding colonialism, the media, pedagogy, literature, literacy, sexuality, intellectual labor, the uses and abuses of theory, and popularized notions about others. So it's once again a collection on some very important and raising issues related with post-colonial concerns. And then we come to the last work of the day, The Black Atlantic, first published in 1993, Paul Gilroy's outstanding critique of the notion of hybridity and creolization. It is reflected in this popular book and describes the fusion of black cultures with other cultures from around the Atlantic. He basically uses the metaphor of a ship, which is basically that a ship carries so many different ethnicities on one deck. So a black Atlantic culture is that whose themes and techniques transcend ethnicity and nationality to produce something new. This black Atlantic is not purely Western, Australian, African, Spanish. It is something new. It is mixture of all these ethnicities. Culture and Imperialism, published in 1993, is a landmark collection of essays by Edward Said. It tries to explore connections between the Western imperial project and the culture which reinforced it. Said examines masterpieces of Western literature like Mansfield Park, Heart of Darkness, and those of such writers like W.B. Yeats, Chinua Achebe, Salman Rushdie, and show how subject people produced their own vigorous cultures of opposition and resistance. Said proposed a new method of reading literary text, contrapuntal, taken from the music world, which tries to discover some of the most important works of Western literary canon rested upon the unacknowledged foundation of colonialism. Contrapuntal reading include two steps. One is that of imperialism, finding where the gaps are there, and second of discovering the resistance to it, which can be done by reading of the text, including what was once forcibly excluded, ignored, deleted, or removed. So this is what contrapuntal reading is. Okay, dear friends, that's all for today. I hope I brought some new knowledge to you. Keep supporting the channel and giving your important reviews regarding the content so that we can improve the quality of it. Thank you, dear friends.